You have to unmute before you welcome people to a Zoom meeting, don't you? Well, welcome to session 5 of Included. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you wherever you are in the world, and at whatever time you are watching this, whether you're with us live or watching us on YouTube. We're certainly glad that you've made time to be a part of this conference where we are remembering, renewing and reimagining what it means to be a part of the Salvation Army, seeking to be more inclusive and seeking affirmation for all people to come as they have been created by God to be who they are. We've had a great series of sessions already. If you've been able to attend them, I'm sure that you've enjoyed them and really been uplifted, encouraged, and informed by what you've heard. But if you've missed any of the sessions, in 2 weeks, they will be available on our webpage, on our YouTube page. You can just go to includedpage.com and you will find links to resources and videos there. The work that we're doing, we believe is very important work, and I think you believe that too, and that's why you've joined this conference. Right up front, I'm going to do a little bit of plug for money. As you know, if you're part of the Salvation Army, we do most of our work based upon donations, and it's no different for us here in Included. We certainly need help and support to put on things like this conference so that we can cover all the background expenses, the tech, the speakers, etc. So if you feel inclined in any way to donate, to give to us financially and to help us out, please go to our webpage, includedpage.com/donate. And then you can help us out with that. Well, this morning or this afternoon or this evening, whatever time it is for you today, we have got a great session. I'm very excited. Our guest speaker today is Paula Stone Williams. I know that she is going to be great, very informative and encouraging, and we'll get a little bit more information about her as we come closer to her presentation. But we have a few other things on the agenda. We've got a testimony from Noela Pintos, who is a Salvationist in Chile, Santiago. She did a video a few months ago that got quite a lot of attention in South America, and we had an interview with her, and she's going to share about that. We've got some creative stuff and some prayer stuff that's coming. So I want to invite you at this time to just sit back, to relax, and to be ready to take in all that the Holy Spirit is going to share with you through the prayer, the creativity, the words spoken. I don't do this by myself hosting. I'm just the co-host. I'm not the main host. My partner in crime is Alison Essex, and I'm going to hand over to her, and she's going to tell you a couple of other things that are coming up as part of this section.
Thanks, John Phil. My name's Alison, and you can tell by the accent I'm an Australian, and it's very early in the morning here. So to all the other Aussies, well done for getting up in the middle of the night. I wanted to have a quick chat to you about the how to ask questions and the breakout groups at the end. So the first thing is you don't have to make any choices about a breakout group. If you want to join a small group discussion at the end, after we've heard from Paula and after the Q&A session, all you've got to do is stay in the meeting, and our Magic Tech team will assign you to a breakout group where we'll have a small discussion, and then we'll all come back together at the end, and the facilitators will share some content from those meetings. The other thing is you might want to ask a question. Best way to ask a question, if something in the testimony or the prayer or Paula's session or, comments on John Phil's shirt, any of those things that you want to ask a question about, you direct them to me. My name's at the bottom of the screen, and you can go to the chat function down the bottom of your screen, and you'll be able to send through a question, and I'll make sure that John Phil's got a good selection of questions. And, of course, any commentary on my shirt is also welcome. All jokes aside, because it is early for me, but not for all of you, we're really glad to have you here, and we really want to hear from you and your contributions. So feel free to send your questions through to me. The next thing we want to do is we want to start this session with some prayer, and I want to invite Margot to come and to pray with us.
Well, thank you so much. And all of you, welcome in Amsterdam. And here, indeed, it's evening. It's dark. So I want to share with you a blessing that we often use in our core in Amsterdam. May God bless us with the red of passion, making your blood feel running through your veins, that you are alive. May God bless you with the orange from the setting sun, where you can wrap yourself in like a blanket of comfort. May God bless you with the yellow of daffodils, so that you continue to believe that death will never win. May God bless you with the green of grass, so you know there is ground beneath your feet, a way to go. May God bless you with the blue of water to wash off all what goes wrong. May God bless you with the purple that as a cloak of dignity is wrapped around you. May God bless you with his light, where all the colors merge and we come home to who we are. Amen.
Amen.
An inclusive church for me is a safe place, free of judgment, free of guilt, a place where people are inspired and encouraged to flourish as they are, the way God made them. A place where people look forward to being because they know in this place they are truly free, free to be their most authentic self.
If the church was a truly inclusive space, then it would be the safe space that I want it to be. It would be a place where I know I could be me, be accepted, be supported. Sadly, right now, that's not the case, and I often feel safer outside of the church than inside.
An intercultural family in every sense, where each individual is celebrated as being made in God's image. This family is able to have a deeper understanding of who God is, because together, their diversity reveals a more complete picture of Creator God.
My idea of an inclusive church is a place where everybody is seen as whole, as made in the image of God, and that their diverse sexuality or gender and all that comes with it is a gift from their Creator, a mark of God's creativity to be celebrated, not a defect to be hidden. It's a place where parents can feel safe to share as their children come out and explore their true selves, where people young and old will be greeted by an embrace after their journey of discovery rather than discredited teaching and harmful practices. An inclusive church is one with full equity, where someone who comes for assistance can then become a participant, a co-creator in the life of the church and the kingdom, and through that find full life, full participation, full opportunity to live out their calling, ministers of the gospel of Jesus Christ who calls us into his sacred service, whether or not they fall in love.
As somebody who grew up playing with Legos, it's certainly fun to see something like that being used to represent who we are. Takes me back to a little boy that was desperate to find representation like that. So that's really, really cool. So we've got a video coming up next. A couple of weeks ago, I was privileged enough to sit down via Zoom with Noela Pintos. She's in Santiago in Chile, and talk to her about a video that she had done and the impact that had had on her and on people about her, and a little bit of her experience of being a Salvationist and being a gay woman who is married to another woman. And so our next segment is that video, that testimony, that interview that we did a couple of weeks ago. Hi, and welcome to the 5th session of the Included Conference. For this session, I'm joined by Noela Pintos. She is a Salvationist in Chile, and I'll just hand it over to Noela. And Noela, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to the Salvation Army?
Well, I'm Argentinian by birth. I was born in Buenos Aires, capital city, but I have lived in many other places because my parents are officers. So we moved to Uruguay, to Costa Rica, that's Central America. And now here in Chile, I've been for 22 years, more or less. And my connections to the army is all my life. I have been in the army in different territories, South America East, South America West, Latin America North. Currently, I attend the Central Core here in Santiago de Chile, which I haven't attended for the last year and 7 months because we're just doing online. And also I'm the Territorial Projects Officer for South America West for 17 years already. So I do all that has to do with projects, with IHQ and different donors. So I deal directly with all the divisional commanders here in South America West. So that's more or less my relationship with the Army.
So I think it's fair to say that the Army it's been your life for all of your life.
For all of my life. Yeah. Since I was born at the Army, and I still, with my 42 years, I still been involved at the Army. Yeah,
I mean, you've got family, worship, career, everything. So obviously the Army is very important to you.
The Army is very important. And, also working for 17 years already at the Army. The Army is most of what I know. So, the Army is where I belong to. It's just in the last years that I have kind of opened up to the rest of the world because of the situation of having to leave the activities itself. But it has been very good to know something more and also to see the Army from another perspective that maybe before it was just everything was so good, and now to see that, okay, not everything is so good.
Right. Now, recently you had a video presentation at a symposium in Brazil, which is kind of what I want to look into and talk about a little bit. If you could just let us know what the purpose of that symposium was, and then give us a little brief outline of maybe what the video contained.
Yeah, that symposium, I was invited. I didn't know that Brazil has this symposium every year. This actually is the third symposium. I didn't know, but I was invited because it was about gender, race, and homosexualism. It was organized by the Salvation Army, but it was not just for the Salvation Army. So most of the participants, like the guests, were from other churches. So it was like with different church symposium. Every day was a different topic. So they invite me for the homosexualism because I think I was like the only out loud say homosexual salvationist, even though it's not, but I am the only one that have said it and have stayed. So they invite me to have like a first-hand presentation, and I think that was great. That was very valuable that I was invited to do that. So I recorded this on a video because they speak Portuguese and I don't speak Portuguese, so they need to do the subtitles. And also because for me it was very difficult to face all these people that I didn't know, and on an online and live presentation to share my story, something that is mine. So I decided to do on video because it was going to be very, very difficult. But finally I had to do it on live and in Portuguese, because when my presentation was coming, all the event was with the hackers. They hijacked. Is that the word? Mm-hmm. Hijacked?
Yes.
Okay. So everything collapsed. All the event collapsed. They shut down and they have to restart again because someone didn't want the video to be shown. Mm-hmm. So finally, I had to do it on live, which I didn't want to, in Portuguese, reading in Portuguese, that is not my language. And it was very difficult for me, very difficult. And they the hackers again, tried to do it when I was doing on live. So that's something that you can see that is not so well accepted. Mm-hmm. So someone didn't want this to be shared and the testimony to be shared from a first hand, from first hand. So it was a very difficult time, but I think it was at the end very good. I felt very supportive by my leadership also, that they asked me to do this. So I felt very supported, but too overwhelmed when this finished. The response of people was very good. Many messages from the person that was hosting this. He sent me a lot of voicemail that he received from people that they, for example, say, I thought I didn't discriminate people, but now with the testimony, I see what I have caused. So a lot of testimony, a lot of people that finally got it, like they saw someone living this. It's not that they heard, they saw it. So, yeah, it was very overwhelming. It was very difficult to get all these messages all at once from people that I didn't know, on Messenger, on Facebook, getting my WhatsApp. So I feel very overwhelmed for the next 3 days. I was very nervous, actually, because all these people writing that I didn't know, and I didn't know why they were writing for, which was the purpose, behind. So, yeah, it was difficult, but I think it was needed. It was important. They're still having the effects of the videos, even though it was many months ago, but they still having those effects because officers started to write the leadership in Brazil saying okay, what's the position of the Salvation Army? And, start to making some pressure, okay, what's the position of the army? But you all know what the position of the army is. So, but it was good. I think it was good to make people uncomfortable and to see that we are here and we exist and we are part of it.
Now, I know that your video is available for people to see it on the Included YouTube page and on the website, but can you share a little bit about what you shared in the video?
Yeah, the video was mainly my testimony about my own discovery, my own very difficult situation of trying to deal with me being Christian and being raised by Christian parents, officers, and with everything that I have heard about being homosexual, and then find myself okay, I'm homosexual. What should I do? Because I'm not supposed to. Trying to ask God, take it out, remove it from me because this is not what it should be. So it was my own process of loving myself and accepting myself through the many years, 11 years hiding, 11 years of knowing myself, loving myself, understanding myself, and how to deal with my love from God, with my love from my wife. So that was the process that I lived. Understanding that I'm God's creation and He created me this way and He loves me this way. So that even, being homosexual doesn't mean that you are like a crazy goat, on the mountain. You have to live your life as you should live your life. Loving who you want, but being how you should be living like Christian, how Christ wants you to live. So it was all my process and of accepting, and it was a very long process. Also being at the church was the most difficult thing, feeling worthy to continue be who I am, a Christian person, worshiping and having all these people staring at you, So dealing with that, and that process is what is on the video, accepting myself and evolution, doing an evolution of what you are. And then making the church know that I'm there and I don't have to hide and I don't have to pretend I am not, And before it was trying to protect the church from me, trying not to do things that the church wouldn't like me to be. But then understanding that, no, it's not that way. The church is open for everyone. I am part of the church. So they should love me for who I am. And I don't have to be trying to protect the church. The church just needs to be inclusive and receive everyone that is there. So that's more or less the video. I'm trying to make people know from my own perspective. Because about, LGBTI, many people gets together and talks about it, but they don't know really. They are not wearing your shoes. Right. So I wanted to do something on my own perspective, something that no one had told me. That's my own testimony, about the tithing, about not being able to participate at the church, but being able to go outside to the social world, but not at the church. And you see all those different, the social work and the church at the army are two completely things. So that the video is more or less on my own experience and how I would like, the church also to understand and to see that we are just as everyone else, and the same person that used to do the brass band, the church, the choir, the youth sergeant major, it's the same person that is sitting there. Right. So that's what I wanted to make people to understand with this testimony and with the video that now is going everywhere.
Well, and I think it is a great testimony, and it's a testimony to not just who your sexual identity is, but also your commitment to the mission of the Salvation Army and your love for the Salvation Army, that you've kind of endured and you've stayed with it, and you're committed to still living out the mission, both in your work, but also as part of the core and some of the work that you had done with the League of Mercy that you spoke about, and even the big issue of tithing and how that became a very and I encourage people, I don't want to tell everybody what's in there because I really want people to go and see it from your own words, but I think it was very eye-opening to just, I can see how some people would see that and be like, oh, wow, I didn't realize just how discriminatory we were.
Because that's the thing, there are so small things that people don't get how much it hurts, because they just take it for granted, and I used to take things for granted. I have to say it, before, when I was hiding on my uniform, I took many things for granted. But when you are in the other side of the fence, there are small things that people do that it really hurts, and it really makes you feel outcasted of the rest of the people. So I say it because this video, then it was played also here in the administrative conference in the territory. And some of the officers that were not mentioned, but were on the video, they heard it and they realized just then, what they have done. Because it was something that it was maybe so common for someone, like, no, we're going to give you just one receipt. But for people that ask, that we have been facing so many things to get where you are, to now being together, you have to leave many things, for living your life as you want it. So those small things are like a stone and a stone, so they don't get it. They don't realize it. But it's just because they don't walk your path, and they're maybe not interested in knowing. And that's the reality. When something is not affecting you, you're just not interested in knowing. So that's something that it should change, because if we are all part of the church, we should be interested.
Absolutely. And I you talked about it being shown in your territory amongst the administration there. And so you told me before, there's not really a lot of conversation that's been happening around this topic within the church there. Do you think this is helping that conversation to start growing?
That's a difficult one. I think they are just dealing with the video right now. So starting a conversation, I think it will take years, ages, to have a conversation, like an honest conversation at the church, without being like judging you, but just talking, like conversation where they can hear you and they don't want to convince you,
Right.
A conversation. So for a conversation, I think we are very far from that.
So what do you think, and even though obviously every long journey starts with a first step, what do you think could be the next steps that the Salvation Army could take, or you would like to see the Salvation Army take in moving towards being more affirming and inclusive?
I have thought that question, and it's a very difficult question because I would like to see many things, but I have, all this year, I have understood that I want many things, but won't happen because there is a system in place already that is difficult. People at the church or officers, maybe by themselves, they want to do many things to be inclusive. But this umbrella that is like the structure is so difficult, But I think like small things that they can do is being honest. And when they say they're inclusive, to be inclusive, but to be fully inclusive, not just inclusive for one thing and not for others. Like I can attend the church, but I cannot participate. Okay, if you're inclusive, you're inclusive. So I think they could start with something so small, like really be transparent in what they are saying, because as I always say and always think, it's like it's social justice. I talked to you about this. We have a social justice commission. It's not just what we have to live at the church. It's not just what we have to live at the Salvation Army, because, for example, here, the church is not going with the culture. The culture here accepts me. I can walk with my wife hand by hand in the street. No one has said anything, never. All my neighbors here, they just love us here. We can go to a restaurant, we can get a loan from the bank in being two women. We don't have an issue, but we're still having an issue with the church. So I think they need to go hand by hand with the progress that also the culture, the country is going, because sometimes they say, no, in these countries it's very bad scene. No, it's not, It's the reality they see just from their side, from the fence, but it's not the reality that people really live. So going back to your question, it would be so much easier to answer that in Spanish. I don't have all the words, but I want to see so many things, but I really want to keep with my feet on the ground what I would be able to see. And I think they just need to start to be very honest and if they say we are a non-discrimination organizations, to start by non-discriminated people that wants to attend church, wants to be part of the worship, and making their life easier. I think that's what I want to see. And then we can come with all the policies and, being officers and accepting gay people as officers and being able to marry. That's a big thing, but we need to start little, at least with that. That's what I think.
I think that's wonderful, because I think we're certainly missing out on a lot of talent, a lot of servanthood, a lot of passion for our mission when we exclude people just based upon their sexuality. Because you and I, we both know we don't love Jesus any less because of our sexuality. In fact, I think part of it has made us cling to him even more, because we've really felt those moments where we need him, because we don't feel we have the church, but at least we have Christ. And I think that's a value that the army is maybe not really taking the best advantage of. We all have something, and our perspective and how we understand faith and Christ is rich and it's deep, and it can really help in other areas. I think it gives us a sense of empathy for others, which would be useful because so often we're working with vulnerable people.
Yeah, that's correct. And it's, as I said, people have left the church for less,
right.
And we continue trying to be part of the church.
Yes.
So, sometimes people is like, they measure your spiritual life about being LGBTI, but that's not how spiritual life is measured, because I said, we have gone through many things and we're still being there because of our relationship with God. That is like all the time, like you can be like, I don't know, they don't accept me and God doesn't accept me. No, you have to be all the time like saying, okay, this is God, this is people. So it's a double work that has to, this consuming, but it has to do with your spiritual life. So I think we deserve to be there because, we really want to be there. It's different, like you have to be there, but we want to be there. So, yeah.
I love that. We're still here. We're still, that's right. Through it all, we're still here. Well, Noelia, I thank you so much for taking time and sharing your story with us. That's wonderful. And I know we didn't speak much about your wife, but she also, Salvation Army herself, growing up and work and worship as well. And both of you have such a commitment to the mission of the Salvation Army and to reaching out to people of all backgrounds and all types of people. But I think your particular status, your sexuality, where you are now really helps you to kind of see where the army needs to be moving. And I thank you for your voice. I don't think you're a lone voice where you are, but you're probably one of the very, very few that has really put themselves out there publicly. And I know that can take a toll. That can give you a little bit of anxiety and concern. And so I really do appreciate your courage. I appreciate you speaking up for the community as well as speaking up for the Salvation Army. So thank you so much. Is there any final words, anything you'd like to kind of leave us with from your experience or any hopes or prayers that you have?
No, I think this is that, my wife as well, she's very committed and bandmaster from the youth band and choir and everything. But I think just the final words is that we want to be part, and there are more people that would like to be part, but they don't dare to be at the church, and they are true about it, and that's sad. But also, we don't want to continue losing people because they are, the church is losing people because of this. So it needs to open the eyes also from the Salvation Army that this is a topic. It's something that is important to deal with. But it's not that we won't leave the church, we won't leave God, because God has never left us and He will not leave us. So that's the most important for us. We would like to continue at the Salvation Army because that's our home. That's what we know. We like brass band, we like all the Salvation Army things, but God is more important, than everything. So, we have been the first to say this, and as you say, it's been difficult because we are the first for everything, like the first that have said it and have stayed. And now is the Salvation Army trying to know what do we do with these people. But it's good. It's good because it's necessary to start thinking. It's necessary to make people uncomfortable, and so they can start dealing with it. So I really appreciate the invitation for sharing my story and sharing this interview. And I really hope that it also opens an opportunity to start having this in this part of the world that is not so much spoken, that is not much information. I really see on the salvos, all the literature and all the books that is available. Here we don't have that much things available. So I really would love to see this coming down the the world, so it can have more conversation and also more people can be included in these kind of topics. But I know this is a first step, so thank you very much.
It's a great step. So thank you. Blessings on you and your wife and all that you are doing. And I would just encourage everybody to keep Noelia and her wife, your wife Cecilia?
Yeah, Ceci, for the friends.
Well, we're all friends, right?
We're all friends.
Let's keep them in prayer. Let's keep them lifted up before the throne of God, because it's not easy when you're sort of on your own out there. And once again, thank you so much and God bless you.
Thank you, John.
There was a great interview that I was able to have with Noelia, and I think you can see her heart and her passion for Christ and for the Salvation Army. So we want to keep her and her wife in prayer. I would encourage you to go over to the includedpage.com and click on resources and videos. You can find the video that we were talking about and see it in its entirety to maybe get a fuller understanding of that interview. But there's some really good stuff in there, and I really encourage people to take the time to go over there and to take a look at that. Well, now we're coming to the part of our main presentation with Paula Stone Williams. I've been very fortunate to see Paula at a couple of events, GCN, QCF events, see her speak. And I know that she speaks at many, many events internationally. She's very well known. She speaks on issues of LGBTQ advocacy, gender equity, religious tolerance. She's been a part of the TED Talk thing, TED Women, TED Summit. She's been in the New York Times, the Red Table Talk, TEDx Mile High, Washington Post, NPR. I mean, there are so many places that her voice has gotten out there and where she has been afforded the opportunity to speak. But because she's worth listening to, because she has something to say, something that I think is very important. When we were trying to come up with guests and speakers that we wanted for this event, Paula was the first person I thought of. Listening to her story, her whole background, her personal journey, in some way has really touched, but also encouraged me. And I wanted that to be shared. I wanted her wisdom, her knowledge to be shared. She does have a book out. I want to take time to promote it. Just to, I think that's only fair to her. It's called As a Woman, What I Learned About Power, Sex, and the Patriarchy After I Transitioned. If you want more information about Paula, you can go to paulastonewilliams.com. There you can see some of her TED Talks. You can also find links on how to get a copy of her book and find more information about her. But I've spoken enough. I'm not what you're here for. Paula is. And so with joy, I hand over to Paula.
Thank you so much, John. It's so good to be with all of you today. So I was CEO of a large religious nonprofit, the host of a national television show, the editor-at-large of a national magazine. I was a successful, well-educated, white American male. But the poet and mystic Thomas Merton said it's a difficult thing to climb to the top of the ladder of success only to realize when you get there that your ladder's been leaning against the wrong wall. I knew from the time I was 3 or 4 years of age, I was transgender. In my naivete, I thought I got to choose. I thought a gender fairy would arrive and say, well, okay, what's it gonna be? But alas, no gender fairy arrived, so I just lived my life. I didn't hate being a boy, I just knew I wasn't one. Went to college, got married, had kids, built a career. But the call toward authenticity has all the subtlety of a smoke alarm, and eventually decisions have to be made. And so I came out as transgender and promptly lost every single one of my jobs. I had never had a bad review, and I lost every single job. In all 50 states of the United States, you cannot be fired for being transgender. But in all 50, you can be fired if you're transgender and you work for a religious corporation. Good to know. It's not easy being a transgender person. People often ask me, do you feel 100% like a woman? And I say, well, first of all, if you talk to one transgender person, you've talked to exactly one transgender person. I'm not going to try to speak for anybody else. I feel 100% like a transgender woman because there are things a cisgender woman knows I will never know. That said, I'm learning a lot about what it means to be a transgender woman. And in the United States right now, that's not particularly easy. It's not easy in Western Europe either, not in Great Britain, not in continental Europe, but particularly not in the United States. Recently, this year, we've had 17 laws passed in 7 different states, taking away the rights of transgender people, primarily transgender children. There are another 168 laws pending in another 30 states, 40 in Texas alone. And so I wondered, who is it that's driving these laws? If you know anything about American politics, you probably assume, well, it's the Republicans driving it because it is Republican state legislatures, but it's not. A recent study indicated that 2/3 of American Republicans believe transgender people should have the same civil rights as everybody else. Another interesting study done after the 2020 election found out that among Trump supporters, 61% of them believe transgender people should have the same civil rights as everybody else. So if it's not American political conservatives who are opposed to transgender rights, who is it? It's evangelical Christians, 84% of whom believe that gender is immutably determined at birth, 62% of whom believe that we already in the United States give transgender people way too many rights, and yet only 25% of whom actually know someone who's out as a transgender person. I was the CEO of one of the largest church planting organizations in the world. I was the editor-at-large of the national magazine of our denomination of 7,000 churches. I was on television in 70 different markets. I was on the regular preaching team of 2 megachurches and regularly spoke in some of the largest churches in the United States. I knew by name probably 5,000 or 6,000 people. I was one of the national leaders of our denomination. But since I transitioned, of those 5,000 or 6,000 people I knew by name, since I transitioned, I've had substantive conversations with exactly 3 of them. 3. How many of my non-evangelical friends did I lose? None. Not any. I'm a pastoral counselor. That's where my doctorate lies. And how many of my counseling clients did I lose? None. Not any. It was only the evangelical world that departed. You have to make of that what you will. Now, I could take it personally, but I choose not to do so. Edward O. Wilson is a sociobiologist who's taught at Harvard, MIT. He's won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. His first was in identifying that the key social unit for the human species is not the nuclear family. It's not blood kin. The key social unit for our species is the tribe, the community. His second Pulitzer Prize was in determining that there are 9 different tribal species. He calls them eusocial species, EUSOCIAL. And he says 8 of those 9 species have evolved exactly as you would expect. An enemy comes into the tribe unites, defeats the enemy, some members of the tribe die, but life goes on. He said, unfortunately, the 9th eusocial species has evolved in a very different and unfortunate way. He said the 9th tribal species has evolved to believe an enemy is necessary for the tribe to survive. And where no natural enemy exists, we create one. He says if we don't get a hold of that, we lose the species and we lose the planet. And where do we find tribes creating enemies that don't exist more than any other place? We find it in the fundamentalist expressions of the desert religions. All 3 Abrahamic religions began as desert religions: Christianity, Islam, Judaism. And as desert religions, they began as religions of scarcity. There aren't many resources in the desert, so I've got to take care of me and mine. Understandably, you compare that to, let's say, Native American religions or Pacific Islander religions. Pacific Islander religions are all religions of abundance because they come from places of abundance. But the desert religions began as religions of scarcity. Fortunately, in their more generous forms, they have moved away from that. Unfortunately, in their fundamentalist forms, all three remain religions of scarcity, creating enemies that don't exist. In the Middle East, the primary havoc created by fundamentalist religion is done by Islam, to a lesser degree by Judaism. In much of the Western world, and certainly in the United States, it's primarily fundamentalist and evangelical Christianity. Now, I believe religion is actually critically important for our species. I speak all over the world on gender equity primarily. The main subject on which I speak is the fact that life is much easier for men than it is for women. Now that I've lived on both sides, I know that. But when we come to the Q&A, people always ask, how can you be a pastor at a church after you were completely ostracized by your church? And I always love the opportunity to be able to say that religion is key to our species. If you think about it, what caused us to take off as a species? We did not develop rapidly as a species as long as we were focused on blood kin. We did not begin growing rapidly as a species, developing language and civilizations until we became a tribal, community-based species. And what is it that brought us together in tribes? It was not our need for safety, as many assume. It was man's search for meaning. That's what brought us together as tribes. Think Stonehenge, or the carved heads of Rapa Nui, or the burial mounds of indigenous Americans. It was man's search for meaning that brought us together. You know, corporations exist for profits for the shareholders. Government exists to take care of the basic needs of the citizenry. Educational institutions exist to impart knowledge. But there's only one organization, only one institution on earth that exists to teach us how to be human together. It's religious communities. And of course, it also explains why every religious community in the world is an absolute mess, because it's the one place we come to learn to be human together and to search out for the meaning of life together. So I believe religion itself is a good thing. Unfortunately, the desert expressions, or the fundamentalist expressions of the desert religions that continue to be religions of scarcity, are not bringing good news into our world. They, in fact, are the primary drivers of opposition to the LGBTQ plus community, and particularly right now, to the transgender community. Why? What's going on right now? It's all based on fear. You know, for the last 500 years, we've made an assumption in the Western world that we are primarily a rational species, that we make our decisions based on the truth of things. Now, this has been a view for the last 500 years, thanks to people like Isaac Newton and Francis Bacon, particularly René Descartes. Probably this particular view of man as a primarily reasonable species found its apex in the British philosopher John Locke. But the view has been that, well, when the day is done, more than anything else, we humans care about the truth, except we don't. When the day is done, more than anything else, we humans care about belonging more than we care about the truth of things. It's a marvelous myth to think that we might care more about the truth than we do about belonging. But every psychotherapist on earth knows that humans are more interested in belonging than in the truth of things. I have many clients come to me who very courageously tell me about the sexual abuse they experienced in their family of origin. And they expect, once they come out and speak publicly about that abuse, for the rest of the family to speak up publicly as well, because they know everyone in the family was aware of the truth of things. The problem is, once they come out, they find out that no one else in the family is willing to come out. No one else in the family is willing to confront the abuser, because everyone else in the family is more interested in belonging than they are in knowing the truth of things. This is true in every area of life. We like to think of ourselves as a rational species that focuses more on the truth. But the truth is, we will stick with our tribe no matter what, even if our tribe is teaching something that is simply not true. And that negatively affects our world today, particularly the LGBTQ plus world when you're looking at fundamentalist or evangelical Christianity. So what can we do about that? Well, we do know that people change their minds, but I love what Jonathan Haidt says in his marvelous book, The Righteous Mind. He says people do change their minds, but not unless information comes to them in a non-threatening way. So how does information come to us in a non-threatening way? How can we take the message of LGBTQ plus advocacy into the fundamentalist evangelical world? How can we do that? Well, the same way we've always done it, through narrative. You know, yesterday I had a wonderful opportunity to spend 4 hours with some of the leading producers, showrunners, screenplay writers for movies and television, shows you watch every week. And I was able to speak one-on-one with the people who create those shows. And the reason they asked a handful of us to come and speak to them, primarily on trans issues, was because they realized that television and movies have been able to move the needle on societal change. For instance, they said until the television show Cheers began talking about designated drivers, Americans did not appoint designated drivers to take people home after they had been using alcohol. Until the television show Will and Grace, the majority of Americans were not supportive of marriage equality. That television series and movies have a capacity to change minds in a way that debates do not. Why? Because we are a narrative-based species. If you think about it, you don't sleep without dreaming. And you don't dream in mathematical equations. Well, maybe a handful of you do, but it's kind of odd. We don't dream in mathematical equations. We dream in stories. The need for story is built into our DNA as a species. We are a narrative-based species. And you can argue all day long on issues about what the Bible does or does not say about LGBTQIA issues, and you're not going to change anyone's mind. We see that with the way in which particularly the American evangelical church is turned against the transgender community. The Bible says nothing about gender dysphoria or about being transgender. And people who try to say that Genesis 1 talks about that, well, they're not theologians, because serious theologians know that Genesis 1 says nothing about that. God created them as male and female. Yeah, there are 16 different types of intersex conditions, and they've been around since the beginning of time. So no, the Bible does not speak on that subject at all. But it's never actually been about what the Bible says on that subject. Again, we're not as interested in the truth as we are in remaining a part of our community. And if our community says it's wrong to be trans, well, then it must be wrong to be trans. You know, I speak in corporations, conferences, universities all over the world. I get paid a lot of money to do it. But I go to Christian universities pro bono or for a very low cost. Why? Because I think if I have an opportunity to get in front of those people and just tell my story, then by the time I'm done, they're going to have to think to themselves, oh my goodness, she seems relatively as healthy or as unhealthy as I am. Maybe I need to rethink what it means to be transgender. Maybe you do. What I think we need to do is tell stories that call people onto the hero's journey. The hero's journey has come into every age, every culture, every language, every ethnicity group. It always starts with the same elements, always starts the same way. An ordinary citizen, that's you or me, is called onto an extraordinary journey onto the road of trials. And initially we reject that call because, hey, it's the road of trials. We're not stupid. Nobody willingly goes onto the road of trials. Oh, but now you're miserable because you know you've been called onto the road of trials and you've rejected the call. And you know that rejecting a call is at your own peril. And so now a spiritual guide comes into your life, a Yoda, if you will. And you find the courage to answer that call onto the hero's journey. And sure enough, you find yourself on the road of trials. And it's pretty awful. It's a road of trials. And then it gets worse. Those of you who've answered the call onto the hero's journey know that. You find yourself in a deep, dark cave. It's what Dante was talking about at the beginning of the Divine Comedy when he said, in the middle of the road of my life, I awoke in a dark wood where the true way was wholly lost. It's what John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul. I've been there more than once. You were lost in a deep, dark cave, and you were utterly, absolutely, completely lost. Do you know what? You discover something there. You discover that lost is a place too. Yeah. Lost is a place too. And it's all right to have to spend some time in a place called lost. You might have to spend weeks, months, even years there. There are lessons you can learn in a place called lost you cannot learn any other way. There are lessons you learn in that deep, dark cave you can't learn in any other place. That's why Rilke, in his poem, The Man Watching, ends this way. He says, winning does not tempt that man. This is how he grows, by being defeated decisively by always greater beings. So finally, you're in the place called lost, and you see the light at the end of the tunnel, and this time it's not an oncoming train. And you get back onto the ordinary road of trials, and now it feels like nothing compared to what you've been through. And you finally get to the Holy Grail. Even then, the hero's journey is not over. Now you've got to take the Holy Grail. Take it home and give it as an offering to those from whom you have departed. Only then are you free to move on in the journey. Now here's the thing. All of us have been called onto the hero's journey. The question isn't whether you're called or not. The question is, will you find the courage to answer that call? I was very comfortable in the evangelical world. I thought, well, I can bring about change from within. Well, was that really true? To a degree, possibly, but I think mostly I was comfortable. And then I received that call to transition. And I transitioned and lost everything. Over the next 48 months after I transitioned, I earned a total of $23,000. All of my work had been within the church. I had a handful of counseling clients left. That was it. But then a couple of years after transitioning, I was invited to join the preaching team of a post-evangelical church in Denver, which caused me to be invited onto Colorado Public Radio, which caused me to be invited to speak for TEDx Mile High, which is one of the largest TEDx's in the world, which then caused me to be asked to speak for TED, the parent organization. Those TED Talks have now been viewed over 6 million times. That caused me to be offered a contract with Simon & Schuster to write a memoir. As a woman, what I learned about power, sex, and the patriarchy after I transitioned. That came out in June. That resulted in feature articles in the New York Times, in the Wall Street Journal, all kinds of television shows, Good Morning America, ABC, Evening News, NPR. It continues. And now they're creating a television series, a dramatic series about my life. It will be 3 seasons, 30 shows. My life has been far more fulfilling than I ever could have imagined. But the most fulfilling part of my life is pastoring a new church here in Boulder County, a church that is open and affirming, a church that believes that orthopraxy is more important than orthodoxy, that how well we love is more important than the doctrines we believe. A church that believes that God is not the ultimate threatener, the one who sends us to hell, but God is in fact the ultimate suffering participant, the one who came to earth in the form of a man to show solidarity with us in our suffering and to show us that our suffering is not the final word. And that the church exists not for its own protection, but then you and the army have always known this. The church exists for the common good, for the good of all mankind. To be able to lead that kind of a church, it brings deep, deep satisfaction. To answer that call, the first half of life, you spend the first half of your life building resume virtues, you're slaying dragons, amassing fortunes, building kingdoms, but then that just doesn't work anymore. And you start working on eulogy virtues. You have fewer friends, but deeper friendships. You find yourself not nearly as interested in being right as you are interested in being in relationship. You no longer look outside yourself for your sense of satisfaction, but you look deeply within your own soul. And you realize when you're called, you no longer have a choice in the matter. You have to respond to the call. One of my favorite poets is Mary Oliver, and my favorite poem of hers is The Journey. It goes like this. One day, you know what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble, and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried, mend my life. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough, and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, as you left their voices behind, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, a new voice, a new voice, a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. That is a lot of depth and richness there, for sure. Gosh, you seem like you've read every book and you know every quote. There's a lot to sort of munch on, and that's why I was so excited to have you come and speak, because what I've picked up from in hearing you speak before is you think deeply. I mean, obviously that comes out of a lived experience, but that also comes out of learning and education, your academics and teaching, and I'm sure having to answer many questions throughout a career. And clearly you're a very thoughtful, deep thinker. And of course, counseling people, I'm sure that becomes a big part of that. There's quite a few things that you mentioned there, but, I was making so many connections to just what our spiritual reality is and what we see in Scripture, and the idea of truth, where we think truth is where we will settle, where really it's tribe, isn't it? That's really where we settle. And I think, at the end of his ministry, Jesus was the truth, yet was without the tribe, as he was put upon that cross. And that's a perfect example of how, no, we don't want truth. We want that belonging for our safety. One of the questions that has come up is, for those who are cisgender, it's asking, how can cisgender people be better allies to the transgender siblings that are in their churches, really in building a safer environment for those. And I would probably sort of put this within the context of a church that maybe isn't necessarily as open and as affirming as maybe we would like them to be? What are some of the tips or tools that can be helpful?
I think the most important thing to understand is that 41% of transgender people, and we're only 0.58% of the population. So roughly 1 of every 200 people is transgender or gender non-binary. And yet 41% of people who are transgender have attempted suicide at some point or another in their lives. It's a terrifying number, 6 times higher than any other diagnosis in the DSM-5. We know that adolescents, particularly teenagers who are transgender, whose parents are not supportive of them, have the highest rate of completed suicide in the world.
Wow.
So where does that come from? Unfortunately, it comes from the fundamentalist forms of the desert religions, all 3 of them. And so I used to think it was all right for those of us who are coming out of an evangelical background to just bide our time, to wait a little bit. This will pass, because it will. I don't think there's any question within 20 years we'll see most of, certainly American evangelicalism, be fully supportive of the LGBTQ plus community. But lives are at stake, John. Lives are at stake. And I think that it's not okay to do what most of the largest churches in the United States have done, 99 of the 100 largest in the United States. 90 of those will tell you that they're open and affirming of the LGBTQIA population, but they're not. In fact, most all of them know who I am, and you could walk into any of those churches and they'll say, oh yeah, we welcome gay and trans people here. And so then you can just ask them, well, would Paula Williams be allowed to preach here? And of course, you'll immediately be told, well, of course not, because they're not open and affirming. And this is a very at-risk segment of the population. So I think it's actually time to be bold. I think it's time to answer that call onto the hero's journey. I mean, I lost everything when I answered that call. But I think my own father is such an example. I mean, he was a fundamentalist pastor. Because my mother demanded that he disown me when I came out. And on his 93rd birthday, I took a chance and called him. And he took my call. And we talked for about a half hour. And a couple of months later, I asked if I could come for a visit. And he said yes. And we met for about 3 hours. And at the end of that time together, he said, Paula, he called me Paula. He said, Paula, I don't understand this, but I am willing to try. He was 93 years old. And he was willing to try and publicly tell his church that he was supportive of me. Now that is answering the call onto the hero's journey. That's courage. My father passed away last year at 96. But I will be ever grateful that he, even at that age, was willing to say, I will take a public stand.
Yeah, that's a great testament to don't write people off because they're older, as if they can't get it and won't change. Because I think the power of love is a powerful thing. And when you love somebody, then maybe they can change for the person that they love. It's very easy to think the older generation will never get it because we do the whole boomer, Gen X, millennial, we separate, but that's not healthy. I'd watched a couple of your TED Talks and you'd spoken in one about how recognizing the different ways that you were treated pre-transition and post, the example you gave being on an airplane. I encourage everybody to go and watch that. It's very, very insightful. But I wonder for you personally in your spiritual walk and in your relationship with God, did you notice any shift in how you approached that after you had transitioned?
Yeah, there are in fact 2 chapters of my memoir that are dedicated to that. 15 chapters of the memoir are really focused on my own journey. It's not so much a book about being trans as it is a book about answering the call onto the hero's journey. But then there are 2 chapters about gender inequity. one of those chapters is what I wish I could go back and tell Paul. You know, if there's just one thing I wish I could say to every man on earth, it's, would you please just assume a woman knows what she's talking about and treat her accordingly? Because it's unbelievable, the difference in the way you're treated as a woman. You're not judged in the aggregate body of your work. You're cut off when you try to speak. I mean, it's a long list. But there are 2 chapters on that. But then there are 2 chapters on why religion behaves as it does in America. A chapter on that, and then a chapter on the difference in my spirituality, and a chapter on the difference in my sexuality. And as human beings, we know that our spirituality and sexuality are so closely intertwined. The two, in fact, cannot be separated. They're coming from the same part of the human soul. You know, our soul is beneath our ego. Our soul is the place where we search for meaning. And our soul finds its greatest expression in our spirituality and our sexuality. In fact, to be quite blunt, if you look at every culture, every age, every language, every ethnicity, going back to the beginning of time, what is the most common phrase spoken at the point of sexual climax? It is, in fact, "Oh God." Our spirituality and our sexuality are very closely intertwined. So once your sexual identity, your gender identity, and your spirituality are aligned, oh my goodness, God becomes so vibrantly a part of your entire being. Men tend to compartmentalize. Our left brain doesn't speak all that well to our right brain. You know, I always say to people, if you're looking at the difference between a cis male and a cis female brain, just take a look at Manhattan at rush hour. You can get across town, but it's going to take you a long time. You know, you just don't see that many neurons firing between the left brain and the right brain for a man. Women, the way their neurons fire is across hemispheres. It looks like a ball of twine. So women have always been able to think more holistically than men have. Men tend to think within categories. And I don't think your spirituality is lived within categories. I think it's lived more holistically. And I believe that's why we find more of even the language of the spiritual mothers, you know, Teresa of Avila or Teresa of Lisieux, or even Mother Teresa or Dorothy Day at a practical level that ends up touching us so much more deeply even than the church fathers, because there is this holistic approach to spirituality. And it makes it one of the really tragedies that the fundamentalist forms of all 3 of the desert religions remain almost purely patriarchal in their leadership, because you actually lose out on that more holistic view of God. So my spirituality now is way more vibrant than it was before. So long answer to your question, John.
Oh, that's great. I think another question that we had, which I think what you've just said leans into, is how did your faith recover and the hurt and anger heal when you lost your church and the church rejected you?
Yeah, you can't take it personally. I mean, you just can't. I mean, you have to take it from that view of the sociobiologist, E.O. Wilson. You have to recognize that it's what tribes do. They create enemies that don't exist. And so what we have to do is show that the enemy that they've created is, in fact, not a very good enemy. And the way we do that is by sharing our stories, sharing our narratives. And I knew I couldn't disappear into the night. I was a well-known evangelical leader. And so I knew embedded in my identity were responsibilities. And so, yes, every time I get another TV interview, every time I end up being in another newspaper, there's a whole nother wave of people who call me, who write me, who tell me I'm going to hell. But, you know, I brought a lot of male entitlement with me when I transitioned. I can handle that. The poor trans kids who are being targeted right now, particularly in the U.S. and in Great Britain, they can't handle it. And so I'm more than willing to take that on and to be the one to share my narrative. So hopefully they can then see the humanity of it all. I want to go back to another question you asked, though, that I didn't really answer. How can we move from being allies to better allies? You move from being an ally to becoming a better ally when you stop being an ally, and you move to becoming an accomplice, an apprentice, an assistant. You can use any of those A words. And when you're willing, an ally is still working from your own power dynamic. You're saying, I will speak up on your behalf. I will support you. I will use my abilities to make a difference. As soon as you become an assistant, an apprentice, or an accomplice, you're giving up your power and you're handing it over to me. You're saying to me as a transgender woman, what do you want me to do? What do you need me to do? And that, I think, is the next step people need to make.
Yeah, absolutely, because it really does come certainly white, cisgender, heterosexual men are very accustomed to centering themselves in this solving every problem. And so
I do believe it's important. I don't like what I see, particularly in the United States right now, where white men are pretty much expected, I think, to feel guilty about just being white men every day for the rest of their lives and never make another contribution to the world. When in fact, white men are often in positions of great power and can bring about more change than anyone else. So all I'm asking is to seek our advice in the change you're going to bring about, because you are the ones with the capacity to bring it about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's having that right voice and experience being voiced. If you're the one in the position of power, at least know that that's what you're bringing into it.
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, it's learning that we don't walk in other people's shoes, so we need to ask them how it is to walk in those shoes and have that respect. Question that we had, I guess, coming back to being, you talked about fighting from the inside of evangelicalism, and then, you knew there was a time for you to move on. And I think the question that a lot of people have is, should they stay or should they go? Is this a lost cause? Should we just cut our losses and get out? Is it worth remaining and fighting? Is that something you don't want to tell people what they should do or shouldn't do? What do you think on that?
It's interesting. If you look at movements and how movements eventually conclude, some of them conclude by being assimilated into the institution whose failures caused the movement to begin in the first place. And they're assimilated into it because the institution has, in fact, taken in the message of the movement. That's probably the best outcome. The second outcome, that's not at all good, is when the movement just dissolves because it cannot sustain itself enough to bring about change within the institution. The third thing that happens to movements is that the institutions are so, in fact, resistant to change that the movement has to create a new institution. Why does that happen more often than the other two? I think the sociologist and anthropologist, philosopher René Girard explains to us the reason for that. He calls it the mimetic theory, that those in power over the eons have learned that they want to remain in power. And the best way to remain in power is to identify before the tribe that you, the one in power, are the only one with the capacity to identify the enemies within the camp. And you then are the one who needs to be trusted to eradicate the camp of those enemies. I think of here in the United States, where in the final year of his presidency, Donald Trump said, "I alone can fix it." This would be an exact example of mimetic theory, of those in power setting themselves up as the only people with the ability to spot the intruders and to, in fact, eradicate the intruders. When the leadership is that kind of leadership, there's really no opportunity to bring about change from within, because they will squash it every time. Yeah. Then you pretty much just need to go. And my own conclusion in the United States, and this is very geographically bound, and I'm probably joined with a lot of other folks in this. Maybe Brian McLaren might be our loudest voice, but probably Richard Rohr, the Franciscan, would be another similar voice, is that fundamentalist evangelical Christianity is not going to allow the change to come from within. It's going to have to come from without. And we see in the United States just a couple of articles that have been published in the last couple of weeks indicating Americans are now looking at far right-wing republicanism as synonymous with evangelicalism. Well, once that's happened, yeah, you're not really going to bring about the change from within. I think it's going to have to come from without, which is why we started a post-evangelical church, which has all the look and feel of an evangelical church in terms of music and style and polity, but not in terms of message. I think in your case, and I used to teach a course, Current Trends in Western Religions. So this is a doctoral course on that subject, something I've been teaching for a long time. I believe in the case of the Army, that with Salvation Army, and again, I know it's also a very different organization in each nation, but I believe you have a little better chance to bring about change from within than some of the other traditional Christian institutions can. I've noticed that even in the interview that you published, and in the video that you put on, and even in the conversations you and I have had, in the conversation before we began today. There is I think, a greater openness, in a part because you've never been an internally focused church. You've always been externally focused. You've always been about bringing the good news of the gospel to the world and not seeing yourself as existing for your own self-protection, which so many American denominations have. So I would say that in your case, it might be a little bit different than it was in mine.
We certainly hope so.
Long answer. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's all good stuff. But I think we have a history, an identity that in the past was very progressive for the time and the culture, women in leadership, the type of people we would put into positions, who we would minister to. And so I think there is something in our DNA that wants us to move in that direction. So I'll take that as prophetic. I'll take that as something that we can take with us and maybe encourage us as we continue on. Well, we've come to the end of our time. Paula, this has been fantastic. You gave us everything I hoped and expected you would. I think we are definitely the richer for hearing from you, from what you have shared with us. I want to encourage everybody, go to Paula's website. You'll find the TED Talks there, paulastonewilliams.com. See what she has to say. Entertaining, warm, informative. It's great stuff. Do you have any sort of final words or anything that you would like to end this with?
You know, another Mary Oliver poem has popped into my brain. Sweet Jesus, talking his melancholy madness, stood up in the boat, and the sea lay down, silky and sorry. So everybody lived that night. But you know how it is when something different crosses the threshold. The uncles mutter together, the women walk away, the young brother begins to sharpen his knife. Nobody knows what the soul is. It comes and goes like the wind over the water, sometimes for days. You don't think of it, but maybe after the storm, after the multitude was fed, one or two of them felt the soul slip forth like a tremor of pure sunlight before exhaustion that wants to swallow everything, gripped their bones and left them miserable and sleepy as they are now, forgetting how the wind tore at the sails before he rose and spoke to it, tender, luminous, demanding, as Jesus always was, as he always is.
I love it. Thank you so much for that, Paula. Thank you. Well, we've come to the end of our time right now, but we are going to have breakout sessions. So we'll be sort of stopping for about 5 minutes, give you an opportunity to go and grab something to drink, do whatever you need to do. And then I invite you to come back. And we'll just split people up. You don't have to worry about choosing a breakout group. We'll go ahead and do that for you. And enjoy speaking with one another, processing some of what we've heard, maybe sharing some questions with one another. But before that, we're going to finish with a benediction.
Words create worlds. God spoke in Genesis, his language distilling into stars, oceans, planets. And God still speaks today.
Always innovating and constantly creating
He is not bent to cultural progress, rather he leads the way.
Not innovation for innovation's sake, but the plan of an upside-down kingdom, when the last shall be first, and a dinner table set for the unlikeliest of guests.
His magnificence draws in the outsider and swings wide the doors for any and for all.
Religious elites look on, shaking their heads at the lavish outpouring of outrageous grace.
Words create worlds. God spoke in Genesis, his language distilling into stars, oceans, planets. And God still speaks today.
And his voice echoes and new constellations dance into view. May we have minds that stretch wide enough to perceive the vastness of his imagination.
And may we have ears to hear, unoffended by the greatness of his grace, even when its boundaries venture further than our own. Amen.